Hi, I'm Kevin, and you don't know me. That's okay. All you need to know about me is one thing. I like horror games. Like many of you, I grew up playing shit I should not have been playing. Little Silent Hill, Dino Crisis, some Alone in the Dark, and a lot of Resident Evil. But a lot of channels wax nostalgic about the survival horror greats of yesteryear, and I might too eventually. I can't make any promises, but instead, I wanted to use this space to spotlight indie horror. Especially in the last year or so, I feel like we're living in a renaissance of DIY horror projects. There's a swath of indie developers taking inspiration from the golden era of PS1 and PS2 survival horror games and putting their own spin on them. Games like Hollow Body by Headwear Games, which takes the dark atmosphere of Silent Hill and stitches it into a cyberpunk backdrop. If Hollow Body came out on the PS2 back in the day, I have no doubt we would consider it a cult classic today. Other developers are doing their own thing entirely. Take Wrong Organ's Mouthwashing, for example, a narrative-driven game about a doomed delivery crew drifting in space. It's a unique experience that's funny, poignant, and tragically dark. One of my favorites from the last year. Point is, indie horror devs are doing cool shit, and I want to talk about it. Don't get me wrong, I love my big AAA horror too. Capcom has been on a winning streak with Resident Evil since 2017, and Bloober Team pulled off the unthinkable, a great remake of Silent Hill 2. But I love the spirit of indie horror. It reminds me of how independent filmmakers from back in the day would grab a 16mm and shoot in the woods and end up creating these cult classics. These games are created by small teams, sometimes as small as one person, pouring their influences into a self-contained, interactive experience designed to make you jump. Without the pressure of a publisher expecting a super marketable product, indie devs can craft titles that push boundaries, poke touchy subjects, and experiment with how to horrify players. It doesn't matter if the gameplay has rough edges or the graphics are unpolished. That just kind of adds to the horror. If I can shine a light on a delightfully dark game for someone that hasn't heard of it before, then that's a win and a good use of my unemployed time. So, that brings us to Butcher's Creek, made by David Szymanski. Boomer Shooter fans will likely recognize David's name because he's the creator of 2018's Dusk, an FPS that would be right at home on an electronic boutique store shelf in 1998. Published by New Blood Interactive, Dusk arguably led to a boom of retro-styled boomer shooters strafing their way across Steam's digital shelves, which makes sense to me because that game fucking rocks. David is also behind a number of short-form, high-concept games designed for weirdos like me, including The Pony Factory, Iron Lung, Squirrel Stapler, and Chop Goblins, which I personally adore and think you should download right now. Right now. I think Szymanski is one of the strongest voices in the indie space. He's experimental, irreverent, knows how to make the most out of a straightforward concept. It doesn't surprise me that Iron Lung is getting a movie adaptation. There's an appeal to his brand of horror that could easily work outside of video games. Butcher's Creek is the video game version of an unlabeled tape you'd find at a video store in the bad part of town. It's grimy, dark, violent, and unapologetic. It's a melee-focused action horror game with heavy nods to condemned criminal intent, and I do mean heavy. It's firmly planted in the analog horror genre, a subgenre popular with and made popular by indie devs because it emphasizes lo-fi graphics and leverages the limitations of outmoded media to create kind of a gritty atmosphere that's purposely out of step with the times. The distorted audio and screen static adds to the feeling that you're watching an artifact not meant for your eyes. Butcher's Creek leans hard into the style, adorning the screen with a VHS filter that made me feel like I was controlling a snuff film. Both the game's story and mechanics are obsessed with the format. You start the game as a character hunting tapes, but in turn find yourself hunted by a sadistic cult. Their goal is to brutalize their victims and film it, offering up the snuff films to an unseen deity called the Watcher in order to kickstart the apocalypse. If I had a nickel, right? These tapes are more than just collectibles though, they're currency. You could spend tapes to save your game at CRTVs you come across or unlock doors hiding more powerful weapons. You could also hoard them to make your health bar sturdier, because in the world of Butcher's Creek, violence caught on camera holds a special power. How you recoup health is actually kind of ingenious. Instead of looking for conveniently placed med packs, you could switch over to your Polaroid camera whenever you spot gore in the environment. Snapping a snuff actually heals you. You can also benefit from smacking cultists upside the head near a wall, as the resulting blood spatter can be snapped up for a small HP boost. All the while you're given encouraging messages like, "Great gore!" The game is gauche, and proud of it. Butcher's Creek is first and foremost a first-person brawler. You'll use an arsenal of found weapons, hammers, spanners, pipes, hatchets, and axes to bash, smash, and cut any flannel-coated sadist that emerges from the dark. They all break with use, so you have to constantly scrounge for your next murder cudgel. Attacking and running will drain your stamina bar, and pretty quickly, too. You have to be economical with your attacks because an empty stamina bar in a room full of apocalypse cultists is a recipe for dead. You can parry incoming attacks, which recharges your stamina, but I found the move risky, especially with multiple foes hacking away at me. Enemy hit radius can be a bit wonky, smacking you in the jaw when you think you're in the clear. It's often safer to go for a swing and then back out of reach, rinse and repeat. You also have a handy kick that lets you knock objects in the level of baddies or send them down shafts. But as much as I wanted to dropkick enemies and the spinny fans and see them turn into like a little blood tornado, I ended up playing cautiously, especially in enemy-heavy encounters. Your character is sluggish, and losing stamina is the real enemy, so I tended to avoid the fancy footwork. Having to repeat big chunks of the game because there wasn't a CRTV to save at taught me it's better to play it safe than murdered by a murder cult. Full disclosure, I am learning how to play in mouse and keyboard. I've spent very many years playing on console with a controller, but I have switched over to PC. I'm having fun learning, but my left hand's pretty clunky on the keys. So that could explain why I was a little hesitant to get fancier than smacking people in the head with a pipe. But, disclosure has been said. There's not a whole lot of variance to the enemy types. There's this fucking guy, this fucking guy, this fucking guy, and their only differing traits are how fast or how sturdy they are. Although even the faster ones rarely outpace a motivated grandma. The real danger lies in groups. They'll keep pushing in and chip away at you, winning by attrition if you don't manage to keep an eye on your meter. I did notice more than a few spots where their AI bugged out and they kind of just gave up the fight. In these moments, it helps to pretend that cult recruitment standards aren't what they used to be, but yeah, it can deflate the tension. I suspect combat connoisseurs looking for a meal might walk away hungry, especially if they have dusk on the mind. The combat here is serviceable and kind of stops at serviceable, but I think that works in the game's favor. It's got a crunchy jank to it that lends to the game feeling like an ordeal to survive instead of a bloody power fantasy. What Butcher's Creek excels at is tone and atmosphere. The combination of low-poly models and rustic shacks and darkened tunnels with the VHS filter got under my skin in the best way. What's not right in front of you is obscured by the grainy shadows. Every sound becomes a threat. Ironically, one of the few parts of the game where cultists weren't after me creeped me out the most. Szymanski makes great use of limitations here, understanding that what you can't see is sometimes scarier than what you can. I'd be a fool not to mention the music because it cooks. Early game tracks are distorted ambiance, like you're listening to a damage recording. Later on, while you're dodging cultists, the music switches to roving industrial. It's buzzy, pulsing, mechanical. It's the kind of music power tools would make if they were excited to skin you. Basically, it's perfect for the game. I'll avoid digging into the story too much since the game is only 4-ish hours long. It doles itself out through on-the-nose environmental storytelling and cryptic notes you find. It's interesting how these notes establish members of the cult, including their individual personalities, and squabbles, but as a player, you never physically meet them. The notes are depraved, funny, and paint the whole picture of the game's sordid story. Some even contain vital clues for how to progress, so don't be skipping them. I'll also refrain from talking about how the game wraps up. Just trust me when I say it's a bloody communion. So I had a great time with Butcher's Creek. As far as my sensibilities go, it's my brand of horror. It's nasty, brutal, filled with psychos, but it's also kind of beautiful in its nastiness, evoking the visual language of no-budget horror movies from the 70s and 80s. Like those films, it does a lot with a little. It's not for everybody. FPS fans may find it clunky, while horror buffs who prefer a more psychological thrill ride will be turned off by how combat-centric it is. But if you think you'll vibe with a grungy mix of analog horror and melee combat, $10 is a small fee for a good time. Well, alrighty. Thanks for watching. if literally anyone digs on this, I'm happy to do more and happier to spotlight horror games that would otherwise lurk in the dark. I know Szymanski has a big following, and so I think there's a lot of folks, especially PC folks, that know about him, know about his games. So I would like to continue spotlighting smaller projects, you know, things off by the wayside that look cool, you know, little 3-hour joints that are fun to play and good for a scare. So if any recommendations are floating in your head, let me know. But otherwise, you can find me streaming at twitch.tv/theredherb. I stream all the time. All right, good night, and don't let the video games bite.
You fuck! You fucking penis!
What did you say? You're a fucking penis.